Welcome to the arena. My name is Greg Sindelar, and today we have a special guest. We're joined by Texas Education Agency Commissioner Mike Morath. Commissioner Morath, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we have a lot of technical questions we'll go into. You have a very technical field, but first, I think would be really interesting for folks is what got you into this? What got you into the education world? Obviously, you were on the DISD school board, and now you're Commissioner TEA. But what got you into the education world, and what made you want to be the commissioner for TEA?
Yeah, my background is not really in education. I did spend a brief time filling in part-time at my high school alma mater for as a high school computer science teacher, but I was not particularly good at it. The kids deserved their money back for that year. No, but I spent most of my young adulthood as an entrepreneur. I ran a software company for about a decade, but I've always been called to serve kids. I did mission work attached to some orphanages in southern India. I actually met my wife on a medical mission in the middle of nowhere in Mexico. She is an eye doctor and was giving sight to the blind, and I don't speak Spanish and have no medical skills, so I was very helpful on the mission. But I was also
Almost as helpful as she was.
yeah, that's right. But I was a big brother as part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters program for about a decade.
Oh yeah, I did that. It's a wonderful
And
program.
it's
Yeah.
amazing. I think imagine how different the world would be if each one of us took responsibility for one life we didn't
Yep.
have to.
Mhm.
So my first little and I, we were matched for about 6 years. When he was 16, he wanted to apply for a job at Brahms. Comes to the house, sits down at the computer, and starts filling out the job application. And I realize that he actually cannot fill out that job application without my assistance. His level of literacy, his reading and writing skills were not adequate. It was a deeply um, both frustrating and sort of moving moment. I'd spent years with him as a mentor, but we did men stuff. We went
Yeah.
out and went fishing and camping and
Yep. That's
grunting.
right.
Doing
Yeah.
stuff that men do. And I didn't spend time actually tutoring him, but I just realized in that moment that we can't allow this to happen. So I sold my interest in my company and ran for the school board because I never wanted that to happen to anybody else. I wanted everyone to have the same opportunities that I had coming out of school. So that's when I joined I ran for office and was on the Dallas school board for 4.5 years, and we tried to do some really bold changes to help kids, and I think we did that. And I'm blessed to have had the governor give me the opportunity to serve in my current role as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, and thank you for being a big brother. One of the most rewarding things. I agree with you. Like if if you're watching, you should absolutely do it. It's an amazing experience. Especially, I think all these years later, I still talk to my little brother, right, and keep up with him, and it's really cool to kind of see them
Yeah,
grow in their
that's
lives.
great.
So when you joined Dallas ISD School Board, what were some of the, you know, eye-opening moments for you? Maybe this isn't all I thought it was going into it, right? When you're running for office, a lot of times you think it's one thing, and then you get into it, you realize it's another. What were some of those eye-opening moments for you?
Well, there's certainly a lot to learn. I tried to visit schools and observe teaching to become a student of the art and science of teaching. And one thing that I think is unmistakable for anybody that gets involved in schools is we have huge numbers of people that are mission driven, that are gifted, and that we're blessed to have. It's sort of an army of angels in
Mhm.
our schools all over the state of Texas. But schools are still large, complex institutions. You've got hundreds, sometimes thousands of kids walking through the school building. And the question is have we organized school the way the system works, the way the curriculum exists, the way that we reward and incentivize our leaders, the way that we coach and guide people? Have we organized schools so that teachers can be successful with their kids? And often there are so many sort of design changes that are needed in order to make sure that teachers can be more successful in the classroom, to make sure they can be financially rewarded. One of the things that we did in Texas and or in Dallas, which the legislature subsequently created an incentive program for all the school districts in the state, is support teachers that as they grow professionally, they do not have to leave the classroom in order to be rewarded financially.
Mhm.
This has been a problem in public education
Mhm.
for years. The only way to get a pay raise is to leave the classroom. And so in Dallas, we set up a compensation system so that the highest performing teachers would get very significant pay raises. And now you have the highest paid teachers in Dallas that are making six-figure salaries. So the legislature has seen the wisdom in that as well and created an incentive for schools all over the state to do that. So we've seen a really significant growth in the number of high-paid teachers around the state. This has had a significant benefit on retention, which one would expect. It also there were some Stanford economists that studied what happened in Dallas, and the impact of that change and some of the changes that we made in Dallas has resulted in one of the largest reductions in the achievement gap in the United States over about a 4-year period. So it can be game-changingly positive for kids, especially our neediest kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's amazing work. And I think oftentimes we always say we want to help teachers, but there's very little that sometimes seems like we're doing to actually help them in the classroom and help them progress in their careers. My sister is a public school teacher in the DFW area, and just like you said, she's been looking at, well, should I become a principal, assistant principal, because that's how you make more money. And so I always think, well, but then we're losing you in
Then
the
we're losing
classroom.
you in the classroom. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right. So
yeah,
we've got to you've got to have a professional pathway for teachers that allow them, if they wish to become an administrator, to do that and to then grow and coach others. But for our masters of the craft that love teaching, you shouldn't have to make that trade-off. There should be a way for you to advance for your own financial well-being and the well-being of your family while staying in the classroom and still molding 20 eager young minds at a time.
yeah,
And so that's what Dallas has done. And now hundreds of districts around the state have modified their compensation systems to provide that kind of financial pathway for our teachers. And I hope that the legislature continues to invest and grow that because it's a significant change. We can't just pay everybody the same because we're all equal in the eyes of God, but we're not all equally skilled
yeah.
at our role. And we need to make sure that we reward merit and performance while people stay in the classroom.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We should have high standards and expect high standards not only of the kids in the classroom, but also of the teachers and those who are meeting those and exceeding those. Absolutely
That's right.
reward them. So one of the issues that we hear from teachers as well is, let's kind of get into the curriculum talk and the instructional materials, and I think a lot of the issues that we see from them is, or hear from them is, the amount of time it takes for them to prepare lesson plans and be prepared to teach kids and keep them ready so that they can then perform and produce on the achieve on the STAR test. So obviously HB 1605 last session was meant to kind of help on both that and improve the quality of the instructional materials and give tools to teachers so that they could maybe get some of their time back and actually focus it on teaching kids as opposed to just preparing materials for the classroom. You want to talk a little bit about the impetus behind that bill, and then we'll kind of go into what has happened since that bill has passed.
This is a little known but very significant problem in our schools that has to be addressed. The governor asked us to form a teacher vacancy task force a couple years ago. So we brought together teachers and administrators from all over the state of Texas, every kind of school district, every representing the great diversity of the state of Texas, our small towns, our big cities, everything in between. And we got a lot of feedback. Of course, some of that concentrated on pay. Some of that talked about supports for discipline, that sort of thing. But one of the really overwhelming bits of feedback that you get from teachers is honoring their time. So many of our teachers are spending 60, 70 plus hours a week working. And if you spend a lot of time and try to unpack that, so live a day in a life, a week of life, a month in a life in a teacher's shoes, what you find is that they spend maybe 6.5 to 7 hours a day directly interacting with students to provide instruction. And if you think most people will have sign up for an 8-hour workday, and they're spending say 7 hours a day in teaching kids, that means they have 1 hour a day to prepare and or reflect on all of that teaching.
Mhm.
And it's untenable. I know in your role you are periodically asked to give public speeches, and
Mhm.
so think about how much time you prepare to deliver a
Yep.
speech versus how much time you actually deliver the speech.
Way more. Yeah,
And,
that's way more.
and that's just on the preparation
Yeah.
side. When you're a speaker, you don't have to be certain that everyone in the audience has mastered everything that you said. And what our teachers actually have to do is that as well. So both before the lesson, from a preparation standpoint, they have to make sure that they're familiar with all the content. I'm teaching the War of 1812. I need to make sure I know all of the details about the War of 1812. I need to understand all of the issues about the behavior of my students and how to motivate them. I need to understand learning science, and I have to have all of that built into my lesson. I might have some students that need individualized adjustment in that lesson. So they need accommodations like more time or special dyslexia supports. So I have to figure out how I make those adjustments for them. Maybe I have some kids that don't speak English all that well and need to make some adjustments for them. All of these things that have to happen, that all has to happen in preparation.
Mhm.
Then I have to deliver the instruction. And then after it, I need to reflect on how well the students did. And for people who spend a lot of time in sports, this is going to be a very normal phenomenon. At Garland High School, I spent every Saturday morning at the field houses with the football coaches because they were reflecting over game film and over the results of the high stakes assessment that the kids all took on Friday night.
Yeah.
That was very public. And so you then reflect on which students really learned the material, which students maybe did not learn the material, and how do I adjust for those particular students. So it's just a huge amount of time. And so what we have to figure out how to do is how do we slow down or streamline the preparation experience and give teachers more time to focus on delivering great instruction. And so this is a large, what I call an engineering problem, because it's sort of how did we design school to work?
Yeah.
And what some of our schools do, not all of them, but they really ask all the teachers to have two full-time jobs. The teachers have to do all of that instruction, and they have to, in many cases, from scratch, design all of the lessons. So our school districts will buy materials. They'll buy digital materials that are sometimes good, sometimes less good. They'll buy things that kind of look like traditional textbooks, but they'll sort of give it all as a bundle to our teachers and say, we want you to design the lessons
Mhm.
using this base of materials. That's a huge job. I mean, that is in fact a full-time job in and of itself. So many of our teachers have this full-time job to be a lesson designer and then a full-time job to be a lesson deliverer.
Mhm.
And it's really just not right. We're overburdening our teachers with this work, and you can imagine if you're a first year teacher in particular, you haven't gone through the entire sequence, so you don't yet see with precision the connection between what you're teaching in October and what is going to be taught in April.
Mhm.
And so expecting first year teachers to do all of this lesson design activity um, is really a disservice to those teachers. We have to support them stronger as from the state, from a school district lens. And so not every school district is organized this way, but enough of them do this because in some ways we at the state have not been providing our school districts with the resources that they need. And I'm not talking money, I'm talking actual well-developed instructional materials that are based on cognitive science,
Mhm.
that cover the material well, that have been through some amount of testing, kind of like random control trial kind of testing. And so you mentioned House Bill 1605. The legislature was looking at this problem. They see the results, the findings from our teachers that we generally need this kind of support, and we're not consistently getting it. And so that's what they did. They said we as a state are going to play a more proactive role in ensuring that school districts have access to high quality instructional materials that they can give that are coherently designed, that have an evidence base behind them, and that help teachers not have to design everything from scratch. I can't tell you how many teachers I talk to that, on Friday nights, they're spending all Friday night on the internet,
Yep.
scouring the internet for lesson materials, and I don't know if you've been on the internet recently, but there's a lot of weird stuff on the internet. So sometimes those resources are good and sometimes they're not good.
And how did we get to the point where, because one of the other issues 1605 is solving that we haven't talked into is most of what was being taught in the classroom wasn't at grade level, and that's what we were finding as well, right? And so how did we get to the point where the resources that they're bringing in were the quality was degraded so much that something like 1605 was needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did the agency did a small scale study, not perfectly designed, but enough to draw some reasonable conclusions from. Looked at 26, 27 school systems in Texas, just at elementary school, just at reading. And what we did was we actually went into the classroom and grabbed the materials that were being assigned to the students. So, you don't just look at the syllabus. This is sort of a for basketball coaches. Ball don't lie. Let's look at the assignments, and the what we found was that only 19% of the assignments that were given in elementary reading classrooms were actually at grade level. So that means 81% were below grade level, and this means that the vocabulary that the students were being exposed to, it's not necessarily that it was inappropriate, it was just below them. I'm in third grade all year long as a student. I'm working my tail off on the assignments that the teacher has given me. I'm a teacher. I'm not deliberately lowering expectations or lowering rigor for kids, but it just has happened that this occurs. And then you take like something like the STAR test at the end of the year, and my grades have all been A's and B's, and STAR test tells me something else. What has happened? Well, what has happened is all year long, while you're in third grade, you were being exposed to first and second grade reading material,
Yeah.
and that's what's been happening. It's been happening on a fairly grand scale. Why that has been happening, I think, is a very complex question. One causal factor was it used to be true that in Texas, the State Board of Education would vet textbooks, and then school districts had to use one of three or four textbooks that the state vetted. And then all training in the state was based on those textbooks, and people stuck to those. And so you could concentrate your time and energy making sure those textbooks were at grade level and appropriate, and then that would have a positive effect. About 15, maybe 20 years ago, that law changed, and that has not been true in Texas for quite some time. And so this has encouraged innovation at the local level, but not every district has access to strong curriculum design resources.
Yeah.
You think about the central office in a Dallas and a central office in a Dumas; they don't look the same.
Yeah. Very different.
And
Yeah.
so, and the other flip side of that is, while the appeal of that innovation seemingly made sense, some of this stuff you really don't have to innovate. I remember talking to somebody that was involved in Jesuit schools, and about the evolution of the Jesuit model, and he was like, "Yeah, we innovated our model. The last time was about 300 years ago." So there's some of this innovation is just unnecessary, and all it becomes is duplication of labor, and so that is a major reason for that we believe a major reason for the change. There's also other reasons. People are often encouraged to engage in lesson design as a way of growing in their craft, which is not a bad thing. But there's a lot to the cognitive sciences, and so
Yeah.
you have to study things like the testing effect and cognitive load theory and interleaved practice, and these may or may not be covered in introductory teacher preparation courses.
Okay. That's great. That's helpful to know. And so, if you look at one of the things that 1605 did, uh, which was done by Brad Buckley and Brandon Creighton, two great legislators, but it directed y'all to develop a set of state-owned, high-quality instructional materials and textbooks. And so, not to use too many acronyms, right? But these are OERs, if I have my acronym correct. Can you explain what the OERs are and what the status of the creation of those is?
Yes. So this is, I think, a big shift, and it's somewhat unprecedented in our history, and it's an important support that we've added for schools around the state. So the OER stands for Open Education Resource. Open essentially means it's owned by the taxpayers, and we, the state of Texas, can modify it on a go-forward basis, and it is free to everyone.
Mm.
That's what open means. Education resource means it's a textbook or something like a textbook, posters on the wall, student activity handbooks, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So that's what an open education resource is. The legislature directed us to build instructional materials, so textbooks, as it were. And I use textbooks sort of in air quotes because this includes letters home to the family, and includes the posters on the wall, and includes the reading material that the students have and workbooks, that sort of thing. But it directed us to build that in elementary and middle school reading and elementary and middle school mathematics to ensure, if you think about this, you've got a lot of commercial instructional materials providers out there, private sector companies, and they're doing things that with all the efficiency of the private sector market, but they're interested in the largest markets they can find. So generally, what happens with commercial products is they build a national product, and then they kind of slap a coat of paint on it for
Mhm.
Texas,
Yeah.
which means you don't consistently get products that are really built for Texas standards based upon our values, our telling Texas stories.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll run into, like, say, a Texas history textbook that is designed for that purpose, but that's just one isolated textbook, and that's very different than what kids are being taught in kindergarten and first grade and
Yeah.
second grade. So what we're able to do then is build something specifically for Texas because we don't need to concern ourselves with what any other state has done. And so that's what we have done. We piloted this for a few years and made significant modifications. And under House Bill 1605, what we've just now done is submitted to the State Board of Education. So that law was built with checks and balances. You have TEA that is building the materials through vendors and subcontractors and the like, and then you have that has to be submitted to the elected State Board of Education, my peers in state government,
Mhm.
and then those elected officials have to say, we agree this is appropriate for our students. This is a reflection of our standards. This is what we want Texas kids to read. So they will be reviewing that along with any other commercially available products over the course of the next several months to determine whether or not it's appropriate. And hopefully, what we've produced passes muster with them. But the core of this is making sure that we have materials that are reflecting of the cognitive sciences. So you think science teaching reading, phonics, handwriting, cursive is a big deal in the Texas standards. So we have made sure that our elementary reading material explicitly teaches kids how to do cursive. And if you go through the content, you'll see there's handwriting even for left-handed kids on how they
Oh, interesting.
how they do the sort
Yeah.
of the hand strokes in cursive. You have to teach that explicit content to kids. You have to teach them how to decode, how to sound out the letters and and
Yeah.
all the letters. You have to make sure they know how to spell. This is what we call encoding, as opposed to decoding. How to read, how to write a correct grammatical sentence
Mhm.
with growing complexity. So we have elementary reading material, reading instructional material that's designed to do all that, to really get back to the basics, back to the fundamentals. But the lessons from the cognitive science are pretty profound on this because you also reading is also about learning words. And so that this means that you need to read texts, or if you're younger, hear texts that are read to you that are complex, that are coherent so you can remember them. They're about one topic for an extended period of time. And then that what you are reading, the reading material that's chosen for you is also relevant to your further studies of history and literature and the arts and science. And so this is actually what you see in a classical model of education. This is generally what you see in a classical school. They have this really strong focus on the fundamentals in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade to teach kids how to read, how to write, all the handwriting and penmanship and grammar and everything. But then they also read the classics and they learn history and they learn science and they learn the arts in their reading time in an interdisciplinary way. So that's exactly what we've done, and we've made sure that the reading material is really reflective of the classics, what many people refer to as the canon
Yeah.
of knowledge in Western civilization.
That's great. And so all of this OER that you're developing, it all aligns with the TEKS, and that's what the SBOE will be ensuring that it's aligned with our standards here in the state.
That's right,
Yeah.
and also that it's appropriate. There's things that are funny for a 17-year-old. It's not funny for a 7-year-old.
It's true.
I don't want my 7-year-old to read that.
Yeah.
You think Steinbeck of Mice and Men. If you ever subject it to, like, what kind of vocabulary has Steinbeck used in that novel, it's kind of written at a fifth grade level, but you don't want fifth graders to read of Mice and Men. It is it there's the moral implications of the story. This is high school reading material.
Yeah.
And so I'm not just commissioner of education. I'm a dad with 4 kids, and I got a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and 2 5-year-olds. And like, there's stuff I'm comfortable with them reading. There's stuff I'm not comfortable with them reading. Not yet. And so you have to think through that. So we've tried to be very thoughtful about that, and that's of course part of the SBOE process, just to make sure that this is reflective of our Texas standards, what are referred to as the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge
Mhm.
and Skills. They are, but they're also what every red-blooded Texan wants their kid to read at that time period.
Yeah. And that's such a hard needle to thread. So who's been helping you kind of put all of this together? Reviewed these OERs and helped put these together so that the SBOE can review 'em. How's that worked?
Yeah, so we have a small internal team, and then we have vendors that basically have hired, and they have writing teams on them. There's probably hundreds and hundreds of people that have been involved in the writing of the content for it. We also have done small trials in classrooms around the state. So a lot of classroom teachers have been helping out, and then we have a network of folks that have raised their hand around the state. These are parents and educators that have been able to lay eyes on some of the content material, make sure that it's appropriate. So a lot of editorial review just to make sure this is a faithful representation of what Texans would want. In addition to all that, the statute, the legislature, besides the checks and balances between us and the State Board of Education, they wanted to make sure that I had an advisory board advising on the content. So we have formed an advisory board of people, real blue ribbon folks, group of folks. These are some folks who are pedagogical experts. So
Mhm.
one of our advisory board members is one of the national experts on the science of reading and sort of elementary literacy instruction and how phonics works and how to teach writing and that sort of thing. But we also have people that just understand culturally what we want kids to learn at various ages of life. And so it's a real broad mix of people that have been advising us along the way.
Okay. And this is the group that ensures, right? Like there's a lot of concern out there about the things going into the classroom and things that kids might be exposed to, but this is a group that's helping y'all ensure that this is meeting the standards that we actually want in our
That's
classrooms.
exactly right. And we're again, I'm not just commissioner, I'm a dad, so I want to make sure this is good in my kids' classrooms, assuming
And I'm
my,
asking you as a dad
yeah,
too.
that's
Yeah.
right. Assuming my schools choose to use this. And one thing to note, this is all an optional resource for school
Yeah.
districts. It's not mandatory. So so part of this review is that, but the way that the Chairman Buckley and Chairman Creighton crafted this policy was with a lot of checks and balances. And so the where we are in this phase right now is we have submitted our materials that we've drafted to the State Board of Education for their public review process. So they have teams of professionals that are evaluating it for quality, for suitability, for alignment with the TEKS, the Texas standards, but it's also just publicly available. So the reading language arts product is probably 100,000 pages.
Okay.
The math product is probably another 150,000 pages. I want to say there's 3,300 total lessons that have been developed for this set of materials. Undoubtedly, what we have done is not without error.
Yeah.
Like there's just too much of it. It can't possibly be perfect. And so you have now, we're in the midst of about a 3-month public review process where we can benefit from all the eyeballs of Texans, and they can say, hey, you've got, some of it could be fairly specific, like you're missing a period here, or there's like some of it could be a factual error. Hey, what you asserted here is actually still contested by historians, or this thing is actually still very much in the theoretical phase, and it's more presented as fact. We want to make sure that we're giving kids accurate information,
Yeah.
um, uh, and so we have this process to gather feedback from thousands, anybody who wants to really. So it's all completely transparently available. Literally every word, every page is available online so that people can review this content. So between now and the time of final SBOE consideration, we will continue to make edits to the product to address any feedback that we get to make sure that it's as high quality as possible, as free from error as possible.
Okay. And people are watching want to go and review it and provide you some of that constructive feedback, where
Yes.
would they go?
So there's the SBOE website, sboe.texas.gov/IMRA. That stands for Instructional Materials Review and Approval Process. So you can go to that website, and actually it's not just our materials. I want to say the SBOE is reviewing 177 products in reading and
Oh, wow.
mathematics, and so you can look at anybody's materials. We're proud of the work that we've done. We think that the construction of the materials that are then owned by taxpayers is higher quality than just about anything else anybody can find. This is a really valuable resource. It's very Texan. There's for yeah, y'all will know, like Clara Driscoll,
Oh,
the
yeah.
savior of the Alamo.
Yeah.
There's a personal story about her growing up with her daddy on the cattle ranches. There's Tomas Rivera, who
Mhm.
is a great Texas writer, grew up in Crystal City in South Texas. The great Corpus Christian Hector Garcia is profiled in here. You've got as we do lessons on how say the police serve us. You've got pictures of Dallas police and Houston police in there. So there's a lot of very specific Texas references. One of the things the lesson I've it's 100,000 pages. I haven't read a good chunk of it, but I have not necessarily read 100% of it at this point. But one of the lessons I remember reading was about one of the early explorations just during the age of exploration in the conquistadors. And so in the Spanish Empire, Coronado crosses the high plains. So think Amarillo. And he writes back to King Ferdinand and says, "King, remember those weird looking cows that I saw? I wrote you about before? Well, here in this land, I see more cows than I can possibly count. Cows, innumerable numbers of cows. The cows." He's talking about buffalo.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of Texas specific references in the product, which you generally don't get in just an elementary reading product, because that's what it is. It's an elementary reading product.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, obviously, your hope is that the OER really helps with some of the issues we identified earlier with the quality of materials in the classroom, as well as helping teachers out. So, can you talk a little bit more about how you expect this material to help the teachers, and maybe you said you piloted it, maybe what you've seen in the pilots and the results you've actually seen.
Yes, well, let's talk about the latter first. So we've been piloting this. So this basic construction that we've had in terms of a really evidence-based foundational literacy product, focusing on the fundamentals, handwriting, spelling, phonics, as well as a broad base of reading material that's interesting. We've been piloting a version of that for about 2.5 years, and the pilot districts are seeing, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, very significant gains. We see a double-digit improvement in the percentage of kids that are meeting grade level in third grade. And what I think is really fascinating is we see not only do we see double-digit improvement in third grade reading scores generally, but we're seeing a disproportionate jump for low-income students, for African American, for Hispanic, for special education students, for students who have historically
Hmm.
had lower levels of achievement. They're growing faster because this is really built around rich language, and kids are hearing rich language in school. You can imagine if you go home and you have two educated parents, you hear rich language at home. But if you go home and that's not what you hear outside of school, then it's really just the language you hear at school that's growing your vocabulary. So it becomes doubly important for kids to be able to be exposed to this content at school, to hear, in the product that we have designed, kids will learn in their reading lesson about the War of 1812 in second grade. Kids will read Shakespeare in fifth grade, and not in abridged, not an adapted version,
Yeah.
the actual, the language of Shakespeare's pen. And that is difficult. It's rigorous. But that's what's supposed to happen at school. Schools need to be loving. Schools need to be a place where kids are safe. But we send kids to school to learn how to read, write, and do math.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so they need to learn, they need to struggle with this new knowledge and grow it in their heads. They need to have memorized their times tables by third grade. They need some things that need to be just become automatic in their memory, some in hearing great concepts. One of the units that is in our newly designed product is a unit in fifth grade, and again, this very Texan unit. It's a unit in fifth grade called Juneteenth and Beyond. And it starts with General Granger making his proclamation in Galveston. And then the kids will actually do a close read of the text of the Emancipation Proclamation in fifth grade. And this is not somebody's hot sports opinion on the Emancipation Proclamation. They're reading Lincoln's text,
Mm.
and they're then discussing this and digesting that content. This causes kids, from a vocabulary perspective, to really grow, from a knowledge of American history to really grow. In that same unit, when they learn about our state holiday becoming a federal holiday, they will also learn some of the civil rights movement, and they will read an excerpted version of Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail,
Mm.
and this is,
We should have some of these Hamas protesters read that letter.
yeah, I mean, because what King writes about, I wish I had the text in front of me, because it's such a great reading lesson, but it's a great text. Is he says that, um, if you are engaged in following a higher moral law, you should not think that this means we should embrace anarchy.
Mhm.
Anarchy is the worst possible outcome. If you're gonna engage in some kind of civil disobedience, you need to do so lovingly, openly, and with a willingness to accept the consequences. I mean, he basically says you can't hurt anybody, you can't hurt any property, and you need to go to jail. Which of
Yeah,
course is, I mean, it's very profound. He's writing this from a jail cell in
yeah,
Birmingham, and then he talks about his motivation for this, and it's not just any law that you're railing against. These are very much higher laws, and he makes allusion to the Boston Tea Party. He makes allusion to Christians being willing to face lions in the Roman Empire.
mhm,
He makes a reference to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego
mhm.
refusing to bow to the laws of Nebuchadnezzar. So it's very clear what his motivation is. And of course, what you want in a broad-based classical liberal arts education is you want kids to be able to wrestle with that text.
Yeah,
So they need to understand, what is the Boston Tea Party? What is this, the Christian persecution at the hands of the ancient Romans? Who is Nebuchadnezzar?
yeah.
So you need to make sure that we are building that kind of broad base of knowledge in our kids, and that's what we've attempted to do with the reading material that we're giving them.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point. You said kids have to struggle with it, and I was doing a school tour in Amarillo, and the principal there at East Ridge Elementary, I thought, said just so profoundly. She said we have to put the cognitive load, take it away from the teachers, and put it on the students, and that's how they grow and learn. And I think too often we do this as a parent, right? Like too often you try to carry a lot of that load for your kids, right? But if we do that and we give them that load, we they struggle, yeah, they're gonna struggle, but ultimately they will achieve, and we know they can do it.
I mean, this is such a fundamental thing about the human condition. It's a fundamental thing about growing and learning. There is no learning without failure.
Mhm.
If I reflect on my own journey, you don't know why the Lord put you on the path that He did, but there's many points of failure that I experienced along the way,
That's
but
right.
it has helped make me the man that I am today.
Yep.
And there's my pastor once, I heard this story about, it's the caterpillar and butterfly. So there's a caterpillar, and it goes into the cocoon, and it's starting its process of struggling to get out of the cocoon. And a teenager walks by, kind of sees this thing struggling, and out of compassion, you go to the caterpillar struggling to get out of the cocoon. You take a little, like, X-Acto blade, very gently sort of slice it open to make it easier for that cocoon to open up. And then a butterfly emerges, and it can't fly, because you actually have to go through that struggle in order for your wings to get strong enough to fly, and the butterfly dies. And this is, every parent, like my wife and I, are we coddling our children? So, like, I was like, it's okay if they fall down and get hurt. Like,
Yeah.
this is part of they have to learn these
Yeah.
things. And this is fundamentally what so much of our debates in public education are about. It's about, where have we set the expectations, and how rigorous is it, and how comfortable are we with struggle?
Mhm.
And there's a balance for sure, because there's a point where you make it too much struggle and it becomes debilitating.
Yep.
There's a but in my observations, our much greater risk is not enough struggle.
Yep.
And we're humans. We love our young.
Yep.
Like, we would have killed ourselves off a long time ago if this were not true. And so we don't want to watch them experience things of moderate levels of pain. But you actually have to struggle with the content. All right, I got to learn my times tables. So somebody's got to sit me down at some point in time after I've done 1 times 1 and 1 times 2 and 2 times 4, and somebody actually has to then make me do it faster. They got
Yep.
to time me on it. Because that's the difference between basic knowledge of my times tables and true memorization of my times tables. Well, you put a clock on it, it's going to create a little bit of tension. But again, this is part of what learning science says that's necessary in order for them to have memorized their times tables. And if they haven't memorized their times tables by the end of 3rd grade, good luck with algebra. You will just reach a ceiling in your mathematical knowledge.
Yep.
And so, it is getting back to the fundamentals. It is making sure that we have high levels of rigor. It is making sure kids are exposed to the classics. It's making sure that they have knowledge of our collective history. And our history is not perfect. We are not without sin.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
the journey of America has been a journey of American exceptionalism, and kids should know that. They should know all of what has happened to make our country better, to make the world we live in. Because it's like, we're a lot better off today than we were a couple hundred years ago, and sometimes we lose sight of that. But the only way you can learn that is to build this broad-based liberal arts, knowledge of history and art and literature and science. That we need to make sure that that's what we're doing. We're not hiding that from our kids, not while they're in elementary school.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I always tell people that America is what it is because of the struggles we had in the past and the failures we had in the past. And we learned and we grew from that as a civil society. And that is why we are at the place we are now, which is much better than it was, 100 years ago, 150 years
Yeah,
ago.
I
Yeah.
mean, this is with the I think, was it Winthrop that was like, describes us as a shining city on a hill, and he's coming, being persecuted by the Anglicans under the British Crown, setting up an environment for him to practice his faith the way that he wants to be. This is this is like the story of America. We are a journey of continuous
That's
improvement,
right.
guided by, for many of us, guided by our faith, but trying to work through problems together in compromise and in our federalist system. I mean, it's the wisdom of the founders is pretty profound.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of getting back to the OER a little bit, you talked a little bit about how it helps teachers. Can you talk about how it helps the students, and especially maybe even dive into, there's students of all different stripes. You touched on that a little bit, but special needs students are students who are way behind. Maybe they don't English is not their first language. How is the material helping kids like that?
Yeah, so gets back to serving our teachers the way that teachers deserve to be supported. So, for those who have not lived as a teacher and tried to mold 20 eager young minds simultaneously, it is sometimes hard to grasp just truly how difficult this profession is. I'm a dad with 4 kids at the house, and that's hard enough. So, what our teachers are, they are in fact neuroscientists. You think about what a neuroscientist does, and they've got to, before the surgery starts, they're in the clean room scrubbing themselves of impurity, because years and years of behavior have taught that them it's a sort of automatic. They don't even have to think about it anymore. What they are thinking about is the patient's case history, everything that could go right and could go wrong during that surgery. They're thinking about what they read in a recent medical journal or some conference. They're thinking about the scalpels and lasers that they need to use, and then they walk into the operating room, and there's one brain under anesthesia that they're responsible to mold. And our teachers have to do this, and their operating rooms have 20 brains, and there's no anesthesia. The patients are very much awake, giving feedback during that procedure. It's a very, very difficult job. And if you have students that need differentiated supports, some students who are currently on grade level, some students who are below grade level, some students gifted and talented that are really need to be challenged. Some students that need individual accommodations under special education. Some students that their 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 knowledge of English is sorely lacking. How do you support them? So what we have actually done with the lesson materials that the state has developed is recognize this reality that teachers have. So there's actually embedded differentiation guidance. So for a student who needs to be challenged, a gifted and talented student, you will see ways to push the lesson to make it even harder or more challenging for them. For students that are potentially struggling or below grade level, they need additive supports. There's specific sort of sidebar comments in the lesson materials themselves. So there might be a prompt that you use for the whole class, and then you might set up a small group over here, and they go deep into, you're thinking about the Trojan horse, for example, and you
Mhm.
have like some kids contemplate getting inside of the walls of Troy and what would happen right after that, while other kids you want to make sure who are the Trojans versus who are the Greeks, coming from the outside of the wall. So and then for students who don't speak English, you often typically want to offer sentence stems that are simplistic English language sentence stems for them. So all that is provided. There's an evidence base from the cognitive sciences that before you begin any reading material in a lesson, you should give a very quick definition of some of the key vocabulary that kids will see in the lesson. So if this is a priming effect immediately prior to the lesson being given.
Mhm.
And that has a beneficial effect on all kids. It has a disproportionately beneficial effect on kids who are still learning the English language. So all of our lessons are designed to have that priming done on the reading lesson immediately before the reading lesson begins. So just as much evidence base as we get from the cognitive sciences to make sure that kids will learn this material and that the supports that teachers have help them do it. So there's another thing from the cognitive sciences that's very important pedagogically in teaching. It's called the testing effect. And so if today is a lesson
Mhm.
and you're the student, I'm the teacher, and I'm teaching you about trees, and I said they've got trunks and they got branches and they got leaves. Then tomorrow we come back. Anybody who's ever taught for any length of time realizes that the kids sleep between the night last night and today, and they may not remember everything from
Yep.
yesterday. Well, that's actually normal. That's the way the brain works. And so what often happens is in day two, you start day two by reminding the kids of some of the content that they heard in day one. And so you do what is a very common practice is a reteach. What cognitive science says, what the testing effect says, is actually you're better off putting that work on the students. So don't tell the kids again what a tree is and that's got a trunk and branches and leaves.
Mhm.
Ask them to tell you, either a short quiz or verbally. Again, it's referred to as a testing effect. What that does is it means that their memory creation will be so much stronger. They're much
Yeah.
more likely to remember than all those three terms that are associated with trees because you've put the cognitive load on them
Yeah.
rather than the teacher doing it. So all of our materials are designed with all of this cognitive science in there. So it's not only are you getting like the classics of America. Kids are reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in fifth grade. They're reading Treasure Island, and they're reading Shakespeare, they're reading Wind in the Willows, and they're hearing Cinderella, getting the classics. But there's all this cognitive science that has been built into the materials to make sure that, from a learning outcomes perspective, it is actually remembered. It doesn't go in one ear and then come out the other.
Okay. That's amazing. And kind of getting into a little bit of criticism that we've heard from the left, especially. There's a lot of, I would say a lot, but there's biblical references in this, right? We talk about the Golden Rule, King David, things of that nature. What would why? Well, let me break this down a little bit. One, why are those included? And two, what would your response be to those who say, "Well, that's teaching the Bible, or isn't there separation of church and state, things of that nature?" Why are these lessons and references important to include in the OER?
The for anyone to get a well-rounded education, to understand literature and art and culture and history, y- it is fairly important part of the human experience that many people have been motivated by their faith tradition. I mean, talked about Steinbeck.
Yeah.
If you're reading Steinbeck or Faulkner or Toni Morrison or really any of the great writers in the American tradition, in the Western tradition, they often include religious references in their writing.
Yeah.
And
Well, you talked about MLK
yeah,
earlier, right?
if you're trying to wrestle with
Yeah.
that, if with literally the letter from Birmingham jail from Martin Luther King, if you don't know about Christian persecution under the Roman Empire, if you don't know who Nebuchadnezzar is, you actually just don't know what King's talking about.
Yep.
So this is just necessary from an education perspective, but it's not any. You think about the religious traditions that kids need to learn. We have a lot in our culture, in modern culture, in our literature that's based upon old polytheistic traditions too.
Yeah.
So you think the religious faith of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, you're gonna encounter Zeus and Mars from time to
Yep.
time in written material. So you need to have some background knowledge on that. One of the religious references that's in the product is actually in a unit on World War II, and it's a quote from Hindu scripture, from the Bhagavad Gita. And why is that quote in there? In fact an extremely important quote in American history, because it is what Oppenheimer said
Mhm.
after the bomb at the test site. And he quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, "Behold, I am become death, destroyer of worlds." So we have the kids read some Hindu scripture in there, because again, this is part of a well-rounded education. So you need to have some exposure to this, because you're going to see these references over and over and over. You think about the idioms of the English language. There's like 200 to 300 idioms in the English language that come from the King James Bible,
Yep.
which stands to reason, because this is literally the most popular book that has been sold in human history. So kids
Yep.
are going to encounter it from a literary perspective,
Yep.
from a history perspective. So this is important from a uh, uh, just from a broad-based liberal arts education. You have to have some background knowledge in this content set. So this is still public school. We want to make sure that we follow the laws of the land and the Supreme Court precedents. So we're not trying to change any legal status quo. We just need to make sure kids are educated.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so a couple last questions as we close it out. Um, you said this isn't mandatory for schools to use. Are there incentives, or what are your hope in ensuring that schools maybe pick up the OER?
Well, I mean, just as a dad, I kind of want my kids to be in classrooms that use this content tomorrow. So I don't know if my school system's going to do this or not, but uh, it's really going to be up to school boards and superintendents and chief academic officers in this state. Every year school districts contemplate what instructional materials do we need to buy, what do we need to get, and how can we best support our kids. We've got pretty strong evidence that student outcomes go up as a result of this instructional material. It's not just as a result of this instructional material. The content doesn't teach itself. You've got to have skilled educators that are supported
Mhm.
professionally in their school districts, teachers, principals, and the like. But uh, ultimately, I don't know how many school districts will choose to use it. What I do know is that we needed to make sure that schools have access to a very rigorous, evidence-based product designed around Texas's standards, the TEKS, not designed around somebody else's standards and then with a coat of paint on it.
Yeah.
That 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 also ensure that by the end of fifth grade, kids have got a broad base of background knowledge for reading anything that happens as they go on, as they continue their studies in literature and history and the sciences and the like. That in mathematics, they have access to that school districts have access to a very evidence-based set of instructional material that will teach the foundational arithmetic knowledge, that will build conceptual understanding. So like I can remember I was in a classroom not too long ago, and the kids were doing solving problems for area. So I asked the kids, "So what is area?" And they kept telling me it's length times width. And I was like, I get that that's the formula. What is it? And I could never get anybody to tell me it's the inside of the shape.
Yeah.
And so you need both of those things. You need to have that kind of instruction. So we just want to make sure that school systems have access to this extremely high quality vetted resource. The SBOE's the great thing about the SBOE's process is that it's designed to look for quality, and hopefully there will be multiple options for school systems to choose from that come out of this product. But is this still a local decision as to whether a school board and a school district wants to go in this direction?
Uh-huh. And then let's end with the brass tacks question. The whole point of this, obviously, is we want to improve outcomes for kids and realize the potential of every child in the state. So obviously implementing new curriculum, things like that, there's always a learning curve that goes with that. If I'm a parent, if I'm a educator, when should I expect to start seeing, the results, the fruit of the labor of implementing this?
Great question. So given the board's timeline, they are likely to make final decisions on what is approved and what is not approved at their November vote this year, November 2024. And then soon after that, the agency, we at TEA maintain an ordering website for school districts. This is where they gain access to the extra money that the legislature appropriated to buy high quality materials. So sometime between Christmas and then spring break of next year, school districts will be able to, if they've decided to go in this direction, they'll be able to go onto that ordering website and place orders for it. The material's all free, but paper's not free. So
Yeah.
you got to pay somebody to print it for you. So this is largely printing costs. But the legislature has given school districts new money to buy the printed copies of this high quality material. And so again, sometime between Christmas and spring break of 25, school districts can place the orders that they would likely ship from whoever the printers are. They'd likely ship and land in a school district in the summer, say June or July.
So by
That's
the 25,
26
26
school year, yeah. So you would think teachers could get preliminary training on the new content in the summer before the 25-26 school year starts, and that's when school districts could really start deploying this. If a school district wanted to go faster, they can, like, anybody can just download the content. It's really like for homeschoolers, private school, anybody can,
Yeah.
parents can just go to our website and get this material today and then print it on their local printer. So there may be a few school systems that want to go slightly faster than that, and they print out, like, they locally print copies and then try it even in the 24-25 school year. But I think most uh, will get this starting in the 25-26 school year or thereafter. And if they don't, if they decide, hey, this is a really good idea for us, but 2 years ago we made another curriculum change, so this is yet another change. We want to do this. We want to do this. Give our teachers some time to get their feet up underneath them. So there's likely that will happen. So there may be some people that then say start adopting in 26-27 or 27-28.
Okay. Okay. So you would think before the end of the decade, you hopefully would see proliferation of this across the state.
I mean, we think what we have produced is the highest quality product that school districts in Texas can have access to. So we think, we hope a large number of them choose to use this. But I mean, I was a school board member. We have local school boards for a reason, so they have to vet this and make these decisions.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner Morath, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all you're doing for the teachers and the students in the state of Texas. And it's been a real pleasure. We've spent an hour together, almost exactly. So thank you for that. And I think one of the most important things that we say in Texas, right? And we try to say this with not too much bravado, but I've heard the governor say it several times. Is we're not trying to be second or third in education in the country. We're trying to be number one, and hopefully 1605 and the OERs that have come from that will lead us to be number one in the state, in the country when
I
it
mean,
comes to education.
I think it will, because all of the preliminary evidence that we have says if this is implemented in a school district and implemented with fidelity, by the time that a group of kindergartners makes it all the way through the end of fifth grade, if that happened at broad scale in Texas, we would have the highest level of both reading and mathematics proficiency in the United States.
I think that says it all. Well, thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate everything, and we'll see all of y'all in the next episode of The Arena.